Thanks for coming. This is our 5th U.S. Center that we've had at the COPs, and we're happy to be back again this year and happy to have some familiar faces in the audience. My name is Jenna Jaden. I'm a climate change specialist for USAID, and I am the MC here this afternoon. The U.S. Center, in case you haven't been here before, is a public diplomacy effort put on by the U.S. Department of State in which we highlight efforts both domestically and abroad that the U.S. is engaged in that are aimed at combating and understanding climate change. We've had a very full schedule all week, and we're going to have a full schedule next week too, so I hope you grab a schedule on your way out and check us out again. This afternoon, our event is titled Climate Services, Bringing Decision Makers Climate Data They Can Use. We're going to have a few speakers, and I will introduce the moderator, who's John Furlow, Climate Change Specialist for U.S. Agency for International Development, where he's been leading adaptation work on USAID's climate change, and where he is also the USAID lead on the adaptation partnership. So with that, I'd like to welcome John up.
So thank you, everyone. I'm going to introduce our speakers one at a time as they speak, but like I said, we're going to start with a game. If anyone else around would like to participate, remember you want to be in a row with other people. So you in the check shirt, you might want to move up because you do want to be a part of a team, not to single you out, but you weren't here when we made that announcement earlier. And anyone else who arrives late, please invite them to join your row so they don't lose right off the bat. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Pablo. Oh, Pablo Suarez is with the Red Crescent Climate Center. Can I have that? And I know Pablo mostly through his work with these games that are educational and are a great way of sort of learning hands-on. In this case, why are climate services a useful thing to have? Hopefully it's going to bring it to life for all of us. And then after the game, we'll have a few minutes to discuss the game with Pablo, and then you'll hear more from me, and then from a number of more illustrious speakers. Pablo?
Thank you, John. Thanks, US Pavilion, for inviting us. My name is Pablo. I'm a researcher on climate and disasters. And as a researcher, I was invited 8 years ago by the Red Cross Red Crescent family to help them understand science. And guess what? I was very good at getting people insanely bored. They were just not interested in what we have to say. They have decisions to make. Do I evacuate or not? Do I feed the hungry or not? Do I stop everything else to go to a training on climate change or not? So that's what we confront. If this is about climate services, we really want everything that follows to be successful. And these 10 minutes or less are going to be for sharing with you one approach that so far seems to be working well. People don't fall asleep when I try to explain climate science. Here's how it works. First, let's make sure this microphone works. You hear me? Yes, good. This is not a die. This is the probability distribution function of precipitation based on the past record. Okay, some years there was a drought, some years there was a flood, most years there was no problem. 6 is flood, 1 is drought. Is that clear? You are not who you really are. Now you are a Red Cross disaster manager, coordinator. You will have to make decisions about how to allocate your resources. And each row is a team, each row is a country. Now, I will invite the person from each row that is closest to this end, like you, sir, to please stand up. The first person, please stand up, and it's you. I'm afraid there's not many people in your row. These are the directors of the country team, okay? Round 1, suppose you have no idea about disaster management, no idea about disaster preparedness or response. All you're going to do now is to do your usual work. Training, change the tires, write reports to USAID to try to convince them that your work is good. And as directors, you're going to put your thumb up like this. Normal conditions, please do so. Good. Stay like that. Stay like that. Apologies for asking you to do strange things. Here's the reins. If there's no flood, no problem. Otherwise, you may get in trouble, and I'll explain what it is. The reins say it is a 4. A 4 means no problem. Congratulations, you were doing the right thing, which is doing the normal thing. If there had been a flood or a drought, you'd be in trouble. Your team has to work. So you sit down and start doing disaster operations, and then 1, 2, and the third person stands up and becomes the new boss. If you had failed to act, if there was a flood and you were like this. But that didn't happen, thank goodness. So how do you address the risk of flood or drought? There are two things you can do. Can you ask you to hold my microphone? If you want to invest in flood protection, you do this. Too much rain, you do this instead of that. If you want to invest in drought protection, you do this, like a bucket with your hand. So if you expect this, what movement would you make? If you expect a drought, yes, like that. And if you expect a flood, what would you do? That. Now they are the directors, but they have a team. You can provide advice on what to do. Importantly, if you act in vain, if you do flood protection and it's normal rains, you are not happy. You wasted one person doing preparedness in vain. So you sit down and he becomes the boss. So let me clarify the rules. Here we are. So again, you are a disaster manager. You can either do, I hope, good rains, or you can do drought protection, or you can do flood protection. And your decisions will have consequences. If you protect and there's no disaster, you lose one. Sit down, he stands up. If you don't act and there's a flood, or you protect against drought but there's a flood, 3 people. You sit down, 1, 2, 3, he stands up. Bad news is if the entire team is exhausted and you run out of people, you get a crisis. Good news is that the team with the most people left win a prize. This is a Dutch delicacy. Good? Rules clear. Good. Team directors, you may consult with your team. What do you do? The rains are coming in 30 seconds. Yes. 1 is a drought, too little rain, 6 is a flood, too much rain. You have 30 seconds to decide. Good. And those who just arrived, they don't know what's going on like in the real world. $20. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. When I say stop, you have to be making the gesture. 3, 2, 1, and stop. So we have 2 flood protection, 1 drought protection, 2 okay. Let's see what happens. Here it comes. Actually, let me show it from here. No cheating. And the result is no problem. You wasted your investment. Sit down. He becomes a director. Same with you. There was no flood. What are you doing with USAID money investing in flood if it didn't happen? Next round, year 2. New directors, stand up. Sir, you're director. Stand up. And if you don't know the rules, welcome. Yes. He just became Red Cross director. He doesn't understand the system. Who does? Now, the people who have changed, they have to stay where they were sitting. You don't take the new place. It's so that visually we see how it's moving down the row. Right? New person stay there. So we can visually see which teams are outperforming others. 30 seconds. What are you going to do? Flood protection, drought protection, or nothing? What are the chances of each? Yeah, what are the chances of this? This is what you know. Make your decisions. 4 and 5 is no problem. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Make your hand gesture and stop. Guess what? Last year there was no disaster, so everyone is going for no problem. Huh? Sounds familiar. Let's see what happens. Flood. Everyone failed to act in flood protection. You all sit down and move 3. 1, 2, 3. You're the new director. It's a flood. Now, new directors, I have news for you. According to the scientists, this is not a normal year. This is a weird year. Sea surface temperatures in the Pacific are anomalous, really hot. We call that El Nino. It's no longer like this. It's no longer 1 in 6 chance of drought or flood. Here is the new probability distribution function. Someone says 50%. I don't know. I'm going to throw this up in the air. If it falls like this, no problem. Normal rains. Like this, showing that. If it falls like this, showing that, that's a drought. So it's a good idea to go like that. If it falls like this, it means a flood. I mean when it stops moving, if it reaches a perfect balance like that. Flood, drought, no problem. Make your decisions. You have 30 seconds. Is this working? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stop. You're all such believers in climate science. Everyone is prepositioning food relief. Everyone is asking farmers to plant drought-resistant crop varieties. Let's see what happens. No drought, no problem. You all wasted your investment. Sit down. The neighbor stands up. Next directors. This year is also unusual. Here's the object. It has 20 sides. A 1 is a drought. Like before, 2, 3, 4, or 5 is no problem. A 6 or more is a flood, and it has 20. What are you going to do? You have 20 seconds. This is because a tropical cyclone is going to your province. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and stop. Everyone is going for flood protection. Guess what? The tropical cyclone could spin around and go somewhere else and you get a drought. Very unlikely, but possible. Climate science speaks in probabilistic terms. This conveys that. Let's see how you did. It's a 10, it's a flood. Congratulations, you all got it right. Last turn, directors don't sit down. Life keeps going. Have you heard of climate change? Here is your new probability distribution function. Okay, it's a little piece of paper that becomes a cone. There. I will throw this up in the air with a little spin, and when it falls, it will stop moving, and 3 kinds of things can happen. Falls like this, no problem, normal rains. Falls like this, too much rain, flood, better to protect. Falls like this, too little rain, drought, better to collect water. What are you going to do? You can come and touch the object, but you cannot toss it. Your climate science models are not good enough. You have 1 minute. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, and stop. And I could see your hesitation making that decision. It was tough. Many go for flood, some go for drought. Some think that aerodynamics will dominate and fall like this. Some think that the spin will dominate. This is like the real world. Ask climate scientists what will happen in the Nile Basin because of climate change. Some say plus 70% precipitation. Some say minus 30% precipitation. What should the Red Cross do? What do we train? What do we invest on? We don't know. We need good science. But until you give us better science, we need to manage the uncertainty that is more and more because of a changing climate. I won't toss it because we don't have the time, so I will give it to the team that has the most people left. I mean, the prizes. This team has only 1 person left, John Furlow. There seems to be a tie. What about the last row? Everyone got 1 left. Well, this is very anomalous. So what we will do is, at the end of the session, this becomes prize for everyone who has played. Those of you who are rate, sorry, this is not for you. Congratulations and thank you.
Okay, thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed that. those of you in the back, if you would like to come sit down, we're not going to make you play any more games. I apologize. That was more fun probably than what we're going to do now. So I hope you have a sense now of what we're trying to convey. Hey, can I have the clicker? So all of us are involved in the Climate Services Partnership, which was born a couple of years ago out of the adaptation partnership with which the US, Spain, and Costa Rica supported. And there's a variety of fact sheets at the back right on that table. Please take some so I don't have to carry them all back to Washington. And we're gonna talk now about kind of how we're operationalizing the concepts that Pablo was trying to teach us about. The Climate Services Partnership, the groups that we have represented here and who have been really key players in this partnership are USAID, the WMO, Global Framework for Climate Services. Jamaica has been our partner and our petri dish. We've been trying a lot of new stuff in Jamaica. They've been a wonderful partner, and we're going to hear from Jeff Spooner, the director of the Jamaican Met Service, in a few minutes. And then the IRI is sort of the brains behind the operation. I'm going to say a very few words about why a development agency is interested in this topic. One of the things that we've been realizing is that when most people think about climate information, they think long-term, end of the century, the big global circulation models. And the people that development agencies work with, we work with a lot of farmers. We work with people making much shorter-term decisions. And so when you talk to a farmer about what might happen to rainfall with a lot of uncertainty at the end of the century, there's kind of a disconnect between what they're doing, what they're concerned with, and the kinds of information that comes out of those long-term models. So we're trying to come at this from a question of what decisions are being made by the people that we're working with, what information would help them make better decisions. We also want to, in the absence of information, people tend to be conservative, particularly farmers. If you know that there can be a very bad year and it can really hurt your livelihood, you're going to try to plan all of your years around that hopefully low probability but high cost event. So we want to provide this information so people have a sense of what's coming in the next season, in the next important time frame for their livelihood, so they can take advantage of the opportunities that are available in a non-bad year. And last, as a development agency, we want to do more than just provide information. We want to make sure that people have access to options, to tools, so they can not only know what's coming, but take advantage of that. It would be like, we want to avoid a circumstance where we're doing something like saying, it's gonna rain tomorrow and you are not allowed to carry an umbrella. We want to make sure that the tools are available for people to take advantage of the information, the knowledge that we can convey. I'm going to show, this is a slide from Walter Betkin at the IRI, whom we hope will be speaking at Landscapes Day tomorrow. Although we heard that he is stuck in an airport somewhere not in Poland. This is a graph showing mean monthly rainfall in Uruguay over most of the past century. It's a nice even curve. Then Walter looked at what has actually been happening. He picked 15 actual years randomly. They're all over the place, and the one thing that comes out is that the average year has never actually happened. So if you have a very low probability of average actually occurring, and yet you're making your planning decisions around that, you're probably planning for the wrong thing. So again, we want to convey information that's useful to the decisions that are being made and the time frames that they're going to take place in. So the question that has motivated the Climate Services Partnership and the community is, can we do better? Can we provide useful information? And that's AID's interest, because of the groups that we work with livelihoods that are highly sensitive to climate impacts. So I'm going to stop now. And the way that we're going to work this is we're going to go from the global down to the pretty local. So the next speaker is Mr. Christian Blondin of the, nice, huh? He is the Director of External Relations with the World Meteorological Organization. We are very fortunate to have him here. Monsieur Blondin, thank you. This is the clicker.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming here. I see many colleagues or friends around, but there are others from other communities, and that's quite good. Let me just perhaps, while the slides are coming on, that the Global Framework for Climate Services is perhaps WMO-led, but it's really from the very beginning a UN collective and UN member collective as well, to make sure, as was explained, that climate information, climate services exist, are made available, and also are used obviously in the most efficient and relevant manner. Already few things has been said about the usefulness such of Global Framework for Climate Services. Perhaps just to add to what has been quickly said by John is the fact that we believe in, at least in the WA community, but more generally in the research community linked to climate, that the science may not be perfect, but is to a point where we can provide useful information from seasonal to longer timescales so that decision can be taken. One of the challenges, and this is one aspect that we're all going to cover, is to go from the global to the very local community level to make sure that information as useful as possible can be provided. So one of the basic reasons also for developing this global framework, which is needs every assistance possible from other UN agencies, but also members and donors, is that in many countries, and unfortunately the ones who are most in need of climate information, the capability are not there. And this is what this graph is showing, that if you look at the left-hand side for you on this graph, you may see that around 70 UN members does lack the basic capability to provide elementary services, which include, for example, just a long series of records to assess the climate. So also, as was said, the key challenge is to, as we said, reach the last mile, to make sure that anyone who needs an information, whether it's early warning or most daily routine product, get it in a timely fashion, and also in a language which speaks to him in its own word. So among the different areas, benefits, or sectors that can benefit most for climate services, following the Third World Climate Conference, high-level task team identify 4 priority areas where climate services might be of the best use and benefit. One is the water. Water resource obviously is a key issue for different sectors, including food security and agriculture, which is the second sector that we privilege. Disaster risk reduction also is very important, because you've seen, and obviously we are all sorry for our Philippine and Vietnamese colleague who suffered from this last Yolanda cyclones. Disaster can really set back development for different countries very far back. Many % of GDP, others can be lost. So disaster risk reduction is a key priority. The last one is health. So having said that, here we in order to move in different sectors, we tend to partner with key agencies in the domain. And for health, this is just an example. We partnered with WHO to create this atlas that was published last year, and who was one of the first to really highlight the correlation, the connection between climate condition and health in terms of malaria or other type of disease and sickness. How this global framework is organized very quickly, we obviously want to base the science on observation on one hand, also on prediction and modeling, and make sure that this information is challenged through proper means of communication, which is climate service information system, And most importantly, we want to make sure that there is a dialogue established between the provider of such information and services and the users. And we want to encourage, even at national and sometimes more sublocal level, that there are structures, ways for the providers of information and users to talk to each other to make sure that the global framework for climate services, which is a general concept, is really driven and answer to the real needs of people. We have a few priorities that I will just mention quickly. Capacity building I just mentioned. We need to have a project and high levels that can demonstrate the value of climate services at whatever level and whatever scale. We obviously need to always strengthen the key message. We need information. We need information. We need infrastructure. And even if we set project which might be time-bound, it's absolutely vital for monitoring the climate that we have a robust, sustainable observation system from which we can get data on which the science can be based and also assessment can be done. As I said from the beginning, GFCS is a collective, so partnership is absolutely clear, whatever the level you want to act with. And obviously, to manage the whole thing, we have tried to put a simple governance on to help the whole thing happening. But I would just insist on the fact that the first Intergovernmental Board on Climate Services established a partner advisory committee, which will be open to all of our international organization who wants to contribute to the GFCS initiative. We have already few projects on the pipe at different level. We have also different scale, pilot project. We also established regional consultation to assess better the need at this level. We have established joint offices to foster the development of climate services in some sectors. And also in the UN, at the UN level, we have established an interagency coordination group. The way we do it, especially within the WMO context more specifically, is to have a worldwide network of regional climate centers. The regional climate centers are the center of excellence through which information on a regional basis could be delivered at the country level, and each country should be in a position to obviously have a more focused or more tailored product for the national needs. The way we tend to develop climate services and make climate information available at regional level is through what is called the Regional Climate Outlook Forum. The purpose of this forum is to have a dialogue between provider of information and users so that they come up especially with a kind of consensus forecast to outlook for the next season or seasons, if it's possible, so that health sector, agriculture, energy, tourism, the Red Crescent, Red Cross, have all a common understanding on the likelihood of the event. I fully share what the game was showing. We are living in a world of uncertainties, and we may have to wait sometimes for even seasonal forecasts to be as accurate or as useful as we may wish. But we have to live within a world of probabilities, and the better you get used to understand the probabilities that this Outlook Climate Forum provide, the better you will be able to make progress in how you deal with the climate variability, which is still very important, and change as well. So, as I say, we want also to go very, very close to the end users. In this particular case, that would be farmers, especially dealing with rain-fed agriculture. And what we do in these roaring seminars, in which come up with not only training and good words, but we come also with rain gauges, for example, to make them becoming actors of their own fate. There is nothing better than a farmer who have an objective view of how much rain is falling on his field. Traditional knowledge is very, very useful. That's absolutely no doubt. and science may turn it to an objective assessment of what are this traditional knowledge be. But nevertheless, objective measurements is much still very, very important. And we will certainly heard about experiments going into Mali or others where this type of seminars has been setting and has been established. And regularly, year after year, the farmers become absolutely convinced that they better had to follow the output and the weather forecast that just rely on their own knowledge, because seasonal the rain season onset, for example, change with time, the pattern of precipitation change, so they need to adapt the planting, they need to adapt to shorter rain seasons, they need to adapt to specific seed as a flood resistant or drought resistant. So this is the purpose of all these seminars, and so you see example of how important it can be when drought is affecting certain areas for quite not only a season but repeatedly season after season. So water management become a clear issue. We also want to look at obviously hydrology, and we would like to have most of the transboundary rivers monitored in such a way that the sometimes conflicting use of water, whether it's for power, electricity power, or agriculture, or irrigation, through irrigation or other type of needs, can be discussed at not only national level but at multiple national level, because all these big rivers are transboundary. For example, the Niger, as you know, involve many countries around his banks. So it's important that those political groupings sometimes are informed with all the best information possible of the state of the river, the likelihood of obviously rainfall, and how they could manage dams or other type of equipment to regulate the river streams. So I think I will stop here, and I'm happy to take a question later on, both in English or French, if someone wants to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from Haresh Bhojwani. Haresh is the Deputy Director of the International Research Institute for Climate and Society at Columbia University, IRI. IRI is part of the Earth Institute. And Haresh is one of the animating forces behind the Climate Service Partnership. So, Haresh.
Thank you. We've really come a long way in the last few years, thanks to the GFCS and WMO's leadership on this front in really launching this comprehensive global effort to provide climate information to a large range of stakeholders. When we started talking about this a few years ago, the situation was quite different. And let's see if green one? All right. And the context for climate services from the beginning has really been about urgent needs, right? So there's two facts up here on the board. One from the UNFCCC of the amount of funding that's expected to have to flow for adaptation in the time frame of a few decades from now. And you see a huge range in that number, partly responding to the huge range and uncertainty of what we know is coming down the road. But also, but whatever that range, it's a massive amount. And we still don't really know how to plan that based on the science, as Pablo's game pointed out. So the need for climate services is really a need to inform those decisions. And the adaptation decisions are decisions about life and death. As Pablo's game also pointed out, the number on the bottom is from FAO, and that's a recent estimate of how many people still are hungry on our planet, which is in large part also climate-driven reality, right? So we have these immediate pressing needs, and we have these longer-term planning needs, implementation needs that need quality information to inform the decisions of policymakers, donors, all the way down to disaster risk managers on the ground and families managing their own livelihoods and decisions. So how are we going to meet this information need? This is a similar map to the one Christian showed of the lack of rain gauges around the world. This map, as he pointed out, doesn't just show a lack of rain gauges, it shows a lack of capacity. A capacity not just to capture and measure the rain, but to produce information that societies find absolutely necessary. And you can see a clear pattern of where the information is most lacking in the world. The lighter areas are places where there's no rain gauges, but also, as I was saying, places where there's very limited capacity in producing climate information that's useful to people. Now, in producing climate information, the thing we've learned the hard way is that you can't just produce the data and information. You have to actually cover a whole range of actions to make sure that this is useful, including making sure that the systems you put in place are sustainable, that there's enough sort of income streams in place to keep the data systems running, that the right collaborations are in place, so you're not just producing information that's scientifically interesting, but useful to decision makers in areas like disaster risk management, agriculture, food security, and so on. And that all those areas actually take investment, time, care, expertise, and that no single agency has all those capacities. No single institute in any field covers that whole range. So this is a field that by its nature requires partnership and collaboration. And the Global Framework for Climate Services is set up as a framework for partnership. And it's a really robust effort to build that. At the same time, there are many efforts going on around the world, and sometimes in isolation, sometimes driven by individual cooperatives, by disaster risk managers, by universities doing research that can feed into this effort and that can help support it. And so the Climate Services Partnership is really trying to help enable some of those efforts to feed into the global solution. So we started out 3 years ago. Or was it 2 years? 3 years ago. Well, John says 2 and Ed says 3, so I'll go with 2.5. And we really started with the first meeting that was held in New York. NOAA and the German Climate Service Center, UK Met, and a few others said, why don't we get together and have a meeting about what we're doing in climate services. At that meeting, we tried to figure out what's the useful space we can fill, even if it's just temporarily. What's the thing we can do as a community that can help push this effort along? Then we had a second meeting in Brussels where we revisited some of these themes and further sort of defined what we should be working on. At that meeting, Jamaica generously offered to host a third meeting, which will be in just a couple of weeks in Montego Bay. So you can still register and come, and it'll give you a nice break from the cold in Warsaw. And Jeff Spooner will, in a little bit, talk about that conference and the efforts we've been taking on in Jamaica in that time period. But what we realized through these conferences is that we see this, the community of practice that's involved in this sees this issue of climate services as an urgent problem. It's not something we can wait to figure out. We have to start solving it now. And we see constant examples of this. We see food security crises in East Africa. We saw what happened in the Philippines just a few days ago. Climate information can save lives and livelihoods. It can help countries accelerate their development pathway. This is something we should be doing now, we need to be doing now. We also realize that there are resource constraints. No single agency, not WFP, not the World Health Organization, certainly not the IRI where I work, not USAID, not even the World Bank, has all the resources to put in place to solve the entire problem. So there are resource constraints throughout. And the resource constraints are actually worse in the places that need the information the most. So if we don't figure out a way to connect our resources and our capacities, we're missing an opportunity to really get a much bigger impact for what we're doing. And we also realize that we have insufficient knowledge. We're really taking what has been a research area and applying it into operational reality. We don't know how to do that yet in every place. I would say we don't know how to do that yet in most places. So we really need to develop the knowledge. So out of these needs, we developed 3 broad areas of work: knowledge sharing, coordination, and learning by doing. So actually putting into practice some efforts, and Jeff will talk about some of the work in Jamaica, to actually figure out how we can learn by coordinating and collaborating better. So some of the big partners involved in this effort are CCAFs, which is the CGIAR's effort to consolidate work around climate change. They have a theme that's focused on managing climate risk, but they're focusing on the smallholder farmer and their needs. That still doesn't address some of the data needs, the information needs, the flows, the governance questions. So we're trying to connect with the other actors that are working on those areas. GFCS, you just heard a great presentation about what they're doing, and we've been connecting with them as much as we can to be useful and to learn from them and to support the effort. USAID, who has kindly organized this meeting. This is a map taken, I just put into the USAID website the search term climate change, and these are all the projects that popped up as having a climate focus. There's thousands around the world. All those projects need information. So we're trying to connect with USAID as much as possible, understand their information needs, their evaluation needs. And the World Bank's PPCR project, which well, it's the World Bank Group, and IDB has been funding Jamaica and the Caribbean region to implement climate services and climate smart development, and we've been trying to connect with them as much as possible, and they've been an active member of the partnership. One of the things we did early on was understand that we need to consolidate our knowledge. We need to actually know what each other is doing. So we started this effort of case studies. In collaboration with GFCS, we developed a common template, and we went out and captured the knowledge. This is all available on the website. I invite you to visit it. You see a real broad smattering of different sectors and areas of interest. So we're really covering a broad range of actors that are interested in this work. This is a quick capture of who's been participating in our annual conferences and who's checking in on phone calls and joining the working groups that develop from the conferences. There's about 200 organizations and individuals representing organizations who are active. And you see a broad range of types of organizations, from humanitarian organizations to national governments to research institutes. So to close this off, this is an image from the first conference where we did a very simple exercise. Everyone said, we don't know what each other is doing in this field. So we had a big world map on in the room, and we had Post-it notes. And we just had every organization go up and put Post-it notes where they were working, describing briefly what it was. In this picture, you can see World Bank, PPCR project. You can see someone from the Ag Research University at Bogor in Indonesia. You can see the Ethiopian Met Service, the Red Cross, the IRI, USAID, WMO, all connecting in this very real way as a community of practice, exchanging information. This led to a whole series of collaborations that I feel like would have taken us years to develop if we just sort of followed the usual patterns. And we've repeated this exercise every year. And now if you go to the CSB website, you'll find a map where all this information is aggregated. So we've been working on understanding the questions that are important to the community and then addressing them. A couple of the questions that we're looking at now and that Ed will be able to dive into in more detail is, how do we evaluate? How do we actually know what's working? Okay, we have ideas of what the quality standards should be, but how do we know if we're actually improving lives? And so we've been developing methodologies to do that, and we've been practicing those, putting those methodologies in practice and learning from them. And another question that's been coming up is the question of ethics. And so people always wonder, why climate services and ethics? But the issue is really, most of us are going from a science background or a broad operational background to offering people very specific advice about how they should be living their lives, what they should be doing to protect their families and their incomes. And these are fraught with ethical implications we've never even thought of. There are other fields like disaster risk management and public health that have ethical codes. What's our ethical code? What are the ethical standards we need to hold ourselves to? So we're starting a whole conversation on that as well. And these are all questions that have bubbled up from our community as questions that need to be addressed. I'll leave it with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Harash. Up next, we have Mr. Jeffrey Spooner, who is the director of the Meteorological Service of Jamaica. Jeff has been a member of Jamaica's negotiating team off and on over the last decade and a half, and he's the focal point for the IPCC in Jamaica. Jeff is going to talk about an effort that's kind of grown out of the Climate Services Partnership. It also grew out of an effort that AID helped Jamaica with starting last year to produce a national climate policy. And there's an event this evening from 6 to 7 on different efforts at NAPS. I have one report left of the work we did there. It's a shame that these are in the order that they are, because we started with the national policy and have focused down on the meteorological service, but that's the luck of the scheduling. So I will stop and turn it over to Mr. Jeffrey Spooner.
Thank you very much, John. And good afternoon, colleagues. It's indeed a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon to share Jamaica's experience with respect to ICCS Climate Services Partnership, and of course ICCS 3, the third international conference on climate services. But before I get into that, I would just like to indicate that Jamaica is that little paradise island in the Caribbean, just south of Miami, west of Hispaniola, north of South America, north of Panama, and east of Belize. So right there in the middle of the Caribbean is where you'd find Jamaica, the paradise. But we are directly in the path of the North Atlantic Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico hurricane belt. And we have been experiencing more frequent, more severe hurricanes in recent times. And also we have been experiencing changes in rainfall patterns, more droughts, more floods. So the partnership here is quite timely, and we really do appreciate this opportunity. Most of Jamaica's economy is heavily dependent on climate services activities. And the two major industries in Jamaica, the tourism industry and the agricultural industry, are major economic drivers in Jamaica. And you can appreciate the fact that these two industries will surely be severely impacted by these two phenomena of climate change. Changes in rainfall pattern and the increase in intensity and severity of tropical cyclones. So what has happened is that the Meteorological Service from time to time is called upon, and more so in recent times, to provide climate service information for our major stakeholders. So what we have found ourselves in the Met Office doing is that we're trying to restructure the Meteorological Service to provide this type of support for our major stakeholders. We have been leveraging investment from a myriad of donors to do this. And we're coordinating investments from the pilot program for climate resilience with investment from USAID, and we really do appreciate the support that we are getting from USAID. Specifically, USAID and Climate Services Partnership, they are providing training and equipment, purchased through the PPCR, that's a pilot program for climate resilience, and from other donors. Our goal, or our aim really, is to build the capacity in the Meteorological Service to provide the information and the services to our major stakeholders. And some of these, and you can guess those, are the Ministry of Agriculture and Fishery, the Water Resources Authority, our Disaster Preparedness Office, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, and the Public Works Department, or local governments in particular. These are our major stakeholders for these climate services. And over the years, we have been having, as I indicated, more and more requests for this type of information from these stakeholders. So, following the invitation to ICCS 2 in Brussels last year, where Jamaica took the opportunity, we really thought it was an opportunity to host the third International Conference on Climate Services, and to sort of showcase what we're doing in Jamaica and to seek the development assistance to see how best we could scale up that sort of activity. So on the return from ICCS 2, what we did is that we launched a national consultation to establish the priority sector for climate services. And I'm a meteorologist, and I was pleasantly surprised that the agricultural sector came out tops. I probably thought it would have been the water resources sector. Water is life, that's what we say in Jamaica. But incidentally, the agricultural sector came out tops, because food is also life. And of course, you can imagine the rest. So the agricultural sector was identified as the priority sector in Jamaica. And what we have done since is that we have formed, that's a meteorological service, and the agricultural sector, mainly through an agency of the Ministry of Agriculture and Fishery, the Rural Agricultural Development Agency, for short we call it RADA. So the Meteorological Service and RADA has developed a working group, and we have continued the stakeholders consultation. Because what we have realized through this consultation is that now drought is really the stressor in agriculture. Yes, when it floods, there are problems, but when we have drought, that is when the farmers in particular suffers mostly. So we have developed, and we're continuing to work on tools to provide the farmers with seasonal drought forecast. And this is tailored for them. One of the things we took for granted in the meteorological service is that we provide information for our stakeholders and take it for granted that is what they want. But most times that is not what they want. So during these consultations, what we got to understand is what the farmers on the ground need from us, right? In what format they need it, how frequently they need it. So this type of information now are being fed back into the meteorological service. What we have to now do, and what we are trying to do, is to place the meteorological service in a position where we are able now to provide these services to them in the format, the frequency, the shape, form, how they need it. What we have done as well is that, and through this working group, we have started to train the farmers to also understand. We have taken it for granted that they understand what we are saying to them. So we have actually taken the opportunity to train the farmers how to really utilize these services, and they are very, very receptive. From time to time as well, we take it for granted that the farmers don't know a thing. They can tell us quite a number of things. So that consultation, that feedback process has been very, very helpful for us. So we have developed this consultative process with the farmers, and now what we're doing is that the Climate Services Partnership and the Columbia University have provided several short training courses for the meteorological staff and for the staff at the Agricultural Agency to enable us now to develop these tailor-made tools for the farmers, these tools that they will need for their planning in particular. And we hope that the first round of these user-made, these tailor-made tools will be developed. And what we are hoping to do is that the experience gained from this activity, we're hoping to replicate it to the other sectors, to the other agencies. And I mentioned the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management in Jamaica. That's one of the agencies that we want to work very, very closely with, because especially through the disaster preparedness, hazard risk reduction, and our Red Cross, we work very, very closely. So that's an agency that we are planning to, but other agencies we are hoping to actually duplicate this type of activity. So the Office of Disaster Preparedness, the other agricultural research institutes in Jamaica, the Water Resources Authority, and our Ports Authority as well. We have actually had dialogue with them, and they are interested in expanding this type of services as we move forward. We are also renewing continuing our efforts with the Regional Training Institute in Barbados, the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. We have worked with them on a regional project, the name is slipping me, CAMI, right? Caribbean Agrometeorological Initiative, and we're hoping to expand on that CAMI project. So we're continuing our relationship with them so that we can expand that knowledge through the region. And through the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, we're also seeking the support seeking to support the WMO in the development of the global framework for climate services. John spoke about ICCS 3 coming up in Jamaica in December, and we're hoping that at ICCS 3 we'll be able to unveil our first decision-making tool for our farmers, particularly for drought prediction. And again, the doors of Jamaica is thrown wide open to come and enjoy some of that paradise I spoke about earlier. And at least we hope to learn from other stakeholders, other partners throughout the region, throughout the world, basically, in the use of ICCS to further plan for the impacts of climate change. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. That was great. I had the privilege to be working with them. I was at the workshop that Mr. Spooner mentioned when we asked the stakeholders who wanted to work with the Met Service. And RADA, the Ag Extension Agency, came out tops because the director of RADA threw both hands up. Public Works and the Water Authority and others only put one. And when we talked to disaster management, they said if you can work with the farmers and build their resilience, then maybe disaster management won't get the call that there's a problem, at least during drought. So, but we do, or the Met Service hopes to be able to build on this initial exercise with Ag Extension. Okay, last but not least, we have Ed Carr. Ed is an associate professor in the Department of Geography at the University of South Carolina. Ed also was a AAAS, an American Association for the Advancement of Science fellow at USAID, and I had the privilege of working with him year before last, I think. And Ed has been doing some work looking at a very interesting project in Mali, and Ed's going to talk about some of what we've learned in examining that more closely. Ed?
Thanks, John. The other speakers actually have kind of nicely set this up. As John said at the beginning, we start out here and work our way down. So come with me into the weeds for a minute and we'll come back out again, I think. Some of the things actually that Jeff just said really speak to what I want to talk about a little bit, which is that we might presume that climate services are a fairly obvious thing to give to people, that weather and climate information is fairly straightforward. You provide information, people use it, end of story. It's substantially more complicated than that, and that's been sort of my job, is to look at that particular issue. What we lack in the climate services community in a lot of ways are the tools we need to learn about what people have already been doing. Up to this point, there's been a lot of actual activity, not necessarily informed by a lot of concept. People sort of acting out of necessity. The Mali project is an example of this. And these things have accumulated, in some cases, decades of history, but we don't have much information about what they've been doing, how well it's worked, anything else. So we need post hoc evaluation tools just to learn from these projects what is and isn't working. And then from that information, ideally, what we need to do is develop then design tools that work the other way around, where we can actually have better assessment of needs. This is something that Jeff was just talking about. And we need to assess the means by which we transfer that information to people, because that is also not a very straightforward kind of thing. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about issues of gender and really social difference when we think about climate services. That's why I said we're going to kind of come down to the ground for a minute here. One of the things about climate service that's enormously important is that we're dealing with a lot of different beneficiaries. And I'm going to talk a lot about sort of small farmer beneficiaries in this particular case, but there are a range of different beneficiaries. We need to understand the different needs that different beneficiaries have: men, women, old, young, different ethnicities, different livelihoods. All of these things have different needs from climate services, and all of these people may have different means of accessing this information. And if we're not taking that seriously, we're probably not doing the job we want to. This kind of stuff is absolutely critical to making climate services an important tool for development. If we want these to be catalytic of changes, if we want these to lead to transformative changes in people's lives, we actually have to identify what they need and what they're going to use it for. And one of the really important things here is we also want to do this right, because if we're just not paying attention to the diversity of the beneficiaries out there, we run the real risk of delivering information that might inadvertently reinforce inequality. And some of the inequalities that we deal with are actually development challenges. We all know that actually dealing with gender equality leads to all kinds of good development outcomes. We might inadvertently reinforce gender inequality, which means that we might be solving one problem by helping people better understand the weather and the climate and enhancing 8 or 9 other problems. And that is certainly not an outcome that anyone wants to see. So, going down the ground a little bit. One of the projects that I've been involved in, that we've been working on with USAID, with IRI, is looking at Mali's agrometeorological advisory program. Been running since about 1981, been delivering weather and climate information tied to agrometeorological information to farmers to help them better plan their planting and their agricultural practices. I'm not going to go into the large description of this assessment. It's very comprehensive. Just quickly, we talked to about 720 farmers so far on this, and we're not done yet. But one of the things that came clear to us as we started looking at the information being delivered, and we started looking at who was doing the farming, because we talked to men, we talked to women, we talked to older, younger, all different kinds of groups, is that this project was designed, and I think many climate services projects are designed, with a sort of generic farmer in mind. The problem is that this generic farmer is a man farming rain-fed crops. Women, in most of the areas we were looking at, are farming hand-irrigated garden crops, which means that the weather and climate information being delivered had almost no bearing on the information that women needed. So almost by default, this information was actually far more useful to men than to women. It's not because the project was designed for that, it was just an inadvertent outcome that came from it. The other thing we found is how the information was delivered has led to significant gender inequalities. Basically, they trained one expert farmer in each village who could interpret the readings from a rain gauge as well as the radio-delivered advisories to tell people when and what they should be planting. Well, when we went around and talked to women, 10% of the women we talked to openly said they were not getting the information, that men only gave that information to other men. And that was not necessarily something we were probing on very heavily. So if 10% of them said that of their own volition, it means a lot more women probably feel that way. So the information isn't even being delivered to women. This is not, by the way, something that's unique in any way to just Mali. We're working with CCAFs on a very similar kind of program in Kaffrine in Senegal, and talking again to farmers and getting on the ground. One of the things we found when we were sitting there talking to them is that men in households throughout Kaffrine really control all the household planting. They will plant their own farms, they plant their wives' farms, and these are usually polygynous households, so they have multiple wives. They will even plant their mothers' farms, depending on how the situation is going for their mothers. But the key here is that men always plant their own farms first. And when we talked to women, this was a universal response back. Yes, my husband will only plant his farm first. We said, well, how long does that take? Women responded anywhere from 2, 3, 4 days, which means that no matter what kind of information you deliver to women, they can't act on it for 2, 3, 4 days because their husbands will be acting on that information for their own farms first, which means that really women just don't have the capacity to act on fine-grained information. You can tell them the day the rain is coming, it's irrelevant because they won't be able to do anything with it for 3 to 4 days. Their husbands will be able to do something with it, but they themselves may not be able to. This is a product of local gender roles and local gender expectations. This is not something you can simply overcome by tweaking the information. You actually have to tailor the information for the social context. This is the kind of stuff that we're working on now. So to kind of pull back out, so now I've just made this whole situation sound a lot more complicated, let's make it sound a little less complicated, or at least give you some hope on this whole thing. Part of why we're doing these assessments is to learn what works, but more importantly, we're trying to learn why it works. Because the why it works question is what is programmable. What works doesn't tell us what to do, it just tells us what worked in that particular place, that time. Understanding the processes behind why things worked out is really important. We're doing this in a number of different ways. The work in Mali is a major multi-year assessment. We're doing everything from large-scale sort of quantitative data collection all the way down to really intensive qualitative work in a couple of villages. We also, as Haresh talked about a little bit, there's a number of sort of mid-level assessments going on which are far less time intensive, and they're also gathering a whole range of experiences as well. So we're trying to learn as many lessons as possible about what's being done to actually, and what's been done on the ground to start to create better tools for design, and so we create better programs. Key here is we're trying to structure these assessments to capture really broad outcomes. There's two reasons for this. One, we don't necessarily know what all the benefits of climate services are on the ground, and if we only look at really targeted benefits, we might miss things that we hadn't predicted or looked for yet. This is a very new area for us. So we're actually trying to cast a very wide net to make sure that we're seeing all these benefits. But the other thing that is really important is we want to make sure that there are actual benefits accruing to society where people's lives are actually getting better. It's one thing to sort of deliver information, even to say, hey, agricultural outputs went up, but does that necessarily translate into better outcomes for people's everyday lives? So we're working right now on building tools for design and assessment that capture these broader issues. We're moving along kind of quickly on this. So we're developing design tools. This is actually a report that I authored with one of my grad students that I believe is live. I'm not sure where it is at USAID, but it's been approved. It's 508 compliant, so it's got to be there somewhere. So we're developing design tools that work. This is on gender and adaptation programming, but we're trying to work on tools that help people better understand who their users are, who the providers are, what the connections between these groups might be. Trying to understand the needs of the beneficiaries and the users. So we have the project in Mali, where we're working with a couple of different groups you can see there, the project in Senegal I just mentioned, and we're working with Red Cross in Zambia, looking at anticipatory humanitarian assistance using climate information for this. My last point then is these tools are meant to do this. They're supposed to take the incredibly messy reality that is that left-hand side, right, which is the real way that people actually make decisions, dealing with so many different factors, so much information. It's a giant mess. It's my willfully ugly slide. I intentionally made it that way. It's uninterpretable. But people do make their way through this world and make decisions in it. Our job is to develop tools that help us understand how people negotiate that complexity, make it easier for us to use those tools so that we can actually design projects that reflect people's realities and actually deliver benefits to them. Thank you.
Okay, we are running a little bit late, but we're not as late as it may seem because of the game. We were given permission to run a little bit into the break. So we have a few minutes for questions. Don't forget Pablo. And Pablo, do you want to at least stand up here? And why don't... Okay. And I'll
That's fine.
point at people, and then do we have a roving mic?
Yeah. And I also want to give a quick shout out to the people who are watching on Ustream. Thanks for joining us. And if you have any questions, please send them in through the chat box on Ustream.
Flip the coin. So in the red jacket at the back.
Hi, I'm Masha Kolanskaya. I'm from the Regional Environmental Center for Central and Eastern Europe. So actually, I'm from European region, and I've got a question. So is still the partnership is still open for new partners? Because since I watched your slide, so I noticed that you don't have this forum outlooks and regional centers of excellency in, for instance, South and Eastern Europe or Central Asia. So and then Southeastern Europe, which is Balkan region, so agriculture is a very important sector, and in Central Asia they hugely depend on hydro energy for electricity generation. So for them, you know, the climate services would be very important. And well, we're also dealing with uncertainty in within Europe. So, and actually, I wanted to speak for, you know, those who took decision about flood protection in the year 1. Actually, in Budapest, this year we had a huge flood, but the flood protection of Budapest, they stood, you know, the challenge, and our metro was saved, our underground communications have been saved, and it's all thanks for those who planned these flood protection infrastructure more than 100 years ago. So there was also a huge flood more than 100 years ago, and so the planners thought would probably the next flood were even more severe. So, and probably they have been also bitterly reproached for wasting public money, but this year we really had to thank them.
Okay. Christine, do you want to take the question about the centers?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. The GFCS is a global initiative, so anyone is very welcome to join in, of course, at any time. And coming to the Regional Climate Center or Regional Outlook forums, you may mention that there are some places where that does not exist. That is true, of course. This is a process which is building on. I mean, we have been doing this for many years through mostly WMO program at the beginning, but now through the GFCS we are looking obviously to expanding this quite a while. But we tend to not to create some things from scratch, in the sense that where they exist, this is because there has been a willingness expressed at high political level to create such a center of excellence as a country level, and then also this center may wish to take regional responsibility, in which case they have to obviously discuss with WMO Secretariat and our Commission for Climatology, as there is a procedure to create this. On the other hand, even if the needs are very clear in your region, Balkan is a case at hand, there may be more resources already available in this part of the world that they may be in Africa or in Asia. So despite we don't like to prioritize things, we try to build things as they come where they are most in needs, with the limited resources that we may have. But the key point is it has to come from a willingness of a country or group of country to set up such things. That's the key thing.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we take one more question, if there's one more question.
Kumar from WMO. I have a question for the gender issues. It is intriguing that you have farms for husband and farms for wives. Don't we have farms for families? So this can you address this issue?
Yeah, sure. So of course, land tenure and land ownership vary dramatically depending on where you are. So in the places that we happen to have been working, which is now in southern Mali, and like I said, in the Kaffrine region of Senegal, there are distinct men's and women's farms in terms of who's responsible for them, who makes decisions on them. This is also true where I've worked in southern Ghana. It isn't true, for example, in southern Malawi. Around the base of Mount Mulanje, the family farms are completely integrated. And so that's actually a very good point. One of the things that comes out in our gender report that we put forward is we were asking for a more complex approach to gender, to recognize that just dividing up your population by men and women and then doing an analysis doesn't necessarily get you at the most vulnerable populations. Not all women are the same, not all men are the same. But one of the case studies was actually from southern Malawi, and one of the things we pointed out, this is just an empirical exercise, a straight gender analysis did not actually give you any information on differentiated vulnerability to climate variability because they were farming the exact same land, the exact same crops. We had to parse it out by other variables before any sort of gender differentiation could become visible over time. So the point is, with the tools that we're working on, and this is actually something we're going to be doing in Zambia in 6 weeks or so, I think, is going into settings without assumptions about who owns the land, how people are making a living. We're building the tools that help people ask the right kinds of questions at the outset to start to establish these sorts of things, so that by the time you get to a design phase, and this doesn't have to take a long time necessarily, but by the time you get to a design phase, you've already addressed these sorts of issues. You already understand where some of these vulnerabilities lie and what the local root causes of them are.
All right, thank you, everyone. Let's thank the panel again. Please take the fact sheets that are on the back table so I don't have to carry them home. And if you can't find Ed's report on gender or any of these other materials on the web, there is an email address at the bottom of the fact sheet, and you can send us an email and we will send you a PDF. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, and please grab one of these on your way out and stop and check out some of our programs later in the week.